Sometimes we need to repeat the things we do. Teachers need to roll call for all their students. In this case, they are calling a different name each time but doing the same action, which is calling out a name. You might be thinking you have no idea how to make something repeat. Don't worry. Swift has covered once again. There are a few different types of loops we'll need to cover. Don't worry. Swift has covered once again. The first type of loop we will see is the for loop. Secondly, we'll take a look at is the while loop. They both allow us to loop through arrays or indexes, while doing it very differently. What's the big difference? We usually use for loops when we have a value we want to go through. Maybe we have 30 students and we want to call everyone's name, we would use a for loop. In the other case, let's say we were playing Pac-Man. The while loop would allow us to play the game until the character dies and then the game would end. Let's look even further into for loops. For loops are typically used for going through arrays, dictionaries, strings and ranges of numbers. Some of that should be familiar to you and some might not be. You'll learn specifically about these later. And now for a deep dive into while loops. This type of loop keeps going until a specific condition is not met. A condition is a statement that determines something. For example, if the water bucket isn't full, keep filling it until water bucket equals empty is false. There are actually two types of while loops. There is while, which we already know and repeats until something is proven false. Then there is repeat while. This checks to see if it's false at the end of the loop. This way the loop will always run at least once. Each loop should be used in specific situations. Let's recap to make sure we have a good understanding. For loops should be used if we know how many numbers we have or how long the array is. While loops should be used if we aren't sure and need to check a condition. Let's start with for loops. For loops iterate through a range of something. Iterate means to do the same thing over and over. So a for loop repeats the same action over and over a certain number of times. Most commonly, for loops are used to loop through an array. In short, arrays are a group of something. Some examples would be a group of numbers or words. Let's take a minute to go over an example. In this case, we have a robot who is greeting celebrities at a high-end event. They are instructed to say hello and then the person's name after. Our robot knows how many people are on the guest list. In this case we are using a for loop because we know how long the list is. Our robot would now loop through the list and say hello to every person until there is no one left on the list. Now let's take a look at some code. Again, this is pseudocode for you to understand the structure. Let's break this down. First we have the for keyword. We have to put this first to show what kind of loop we're using. Then we have the name. This is the variable we use inside the loop. This can be named whatever we want. We use the in keyword to show what variable we are taking out of the array or range. In plain English, this sounds like the following. For each name in the guest list of names, do an action. In our example, name is the current name we're saying hello to. Names is the array. For loops work by going through every item, on every name in a list. It performs the exact same action one very item until it gets through all of them. Then the loop ends. This is how for loop works. Let's go ahead and check out the working of while loop. Now let's move on to while loops. While loops run until a condition is false. Remember, a condition is something we are checking if it is true or false. A good example would be Pac-Man having 3 lives. When he doesn't have any lives left, the game loop ends and the condition is false. Let's see a while loop in action. In this example, while the Pac-Man's life is more than 0, the game will be on. Once the life is equal to or less than 0, the game will stop. The structure of the while loop is similar to that of for loop. Similar to for loop statement, we have the while keyword in the beginning, which determines the type of loop. The while keyword is followed by the condition. We determine the condition using variables, numbers and comparison operators. In the above example, Pac-Man's life greater than 0 is the condition. Pac-Man's life is a variable followed by the comparison operator greater than. After the comparison operator, there is a condition value to which the variable is being compared. 0 in this case. This condition will be checked before executing the task. If the condition is true, it will perform the task, i.e. keep the game on repeatedly until the Pac-Man's life equals 0. In this lesson we learned about loops in Swift. We learned about two loops, for and while. We also learned the difference between for loop and while loop, in what situation each loop is used and how to declare each loop.